I think there's no question that 4 teams in this year's draft absolutely, positively had to come out of this draft with a young quarterback that they had taken high. Had no choice. Had to do it. The Cleveland Browns, duh. The New York Jets, duh. The Buffalo Bills, duh. And every bit as obvious to most of us, the Arizona Cardinals. This has been a gaping void in their front office logic in recent years, the failure to address that position early in the draft, especially knowing Carson Palmer had some injury issues. He was at the tail end of his career. It really put the organization, I feel like, in a less than ideal situation, because now you're still scrambling to try and find that guy instead of already have that guy in place, groomed, and ready to take over. The Cardinals, no matter what, to me this was one of these situations, it was quarterback no matter what. And if that meant that they liked a guy that required them to give up most of an entire draft to go get him, then that's what the F you had to do, period. Because until the Arizona Cardinals got a young guy that they felt could be the franchise, they mean nothing in the grand scheme of the NFL. And they will only get to a certain point and not go any further. And that's just the simple truth of the matter. And look at how much it impacted that team over the past 2 years, having to rely on journeymen and scrubs like Drew Stanton and Blaine Gabbert to try and win games with once Carson Palmer eventually inevitably went down. They had no choice here. And outside of the Browns and maybe the Jets, I felt like the need for the Cardinals is every bit as equivalent in terms of having to have a quarterback. I thought it was equal to the Buffalo Bills. Absolutely. They had to get this guy. Like, it was so obvious to so many people. So it made me wonder with Steve Keim if he was actually going to do it this year. Because it's been something we talked about over the past couple of years, and they didn't do it. So were they finally going to do it this year? No matter what. Well, we got our answer. They did. They had to go get a young quarterback, and they did it. The positive about getting the quarterback that they did at the slot that they did was they didn't really have to sacrifice a ton in this year's draft. What, they give up like a 3rd and 5th round pick? And sacrifice nothing in the 2019 draft in order to get that guy. Like, if you're the Cardinals, you have to feel really good about that from a draft pick currency standpoint. 3rd round pick, 5th round pick, to move up 5 spots to make sure you got your young quarterback to build around, you have to do it. You absolutely have to do it. Now, that said, I have made my opinions very well known when it comes to Josh Rosen and my thoughts on him in terms of just how overrated I feel like he is as a prospect. And even when you remove the stuff about the off-the-field concerns and whether teammates like him or not and how he conducts and carries himself, the things that he talks about, I still feel like on top of those concerns of whether they're viable or legitimate or not, and some of them I feel like are, and some of them probably are overblown, to be fair to Josh, there are legitimate, viable, on-the-field football concerns. This is a guy that's tall, but kind of skinny. This is a guy who's not a great athlete, not incredibly mobile, who's had some concussion and other durability concerns, whose arm strength isn't as great as people make it out to be, especially when he's not in a perfect environment, a perfect situation. He has to move his feet or get off of his base at all. His arm strength lingers behind, quite a bit. He's better at making reads before the snap, and once he snaps the ball, he's kind of so-so. I mean, there are real, viable, legitimate concerns about him. And to be fair, again, to Josh, I have said numerous times that for all 5 of the quarterbacks that ultimately were taken in round 1 in this draft, there were big concerns to me about every single one of these guys, big enough to where you could make an argument that a couple of them might pan out, or none of them might pan out. That all of them had major bust potential. I just felt like Rosen had the most bust potential. And we will see long-term whether this team would have been better off being more aggressive and going up and getting a Josh Allen or a Sam Darnold, or if they would have been better off staying put at pick 15 or potentially trading down a little bit and drafting Lamar Jackson. Like, I think in the grand scheme of things, if you're measuring Rosen from the Cardinals standpoint in terms of the draft, you're probably looking at him versus Lamar Jackson long term. Because Lamar is the guy they could have had and not had to trade for. And you also wonder, too, would Miami have really taken Josh Rosen number 11? Did the Cardinals have to move up to get him? Well, I do feel like this. The price wasn't that preventative. If they really liked Rosen, then it was worth the price to move up 5 spots and give up a 3rd and 5th round pick in this year's draft to go get the guy. Don't get too cute. Don't try to dink around. Because if you didn't have Lamar Jackson rated that high, then you don't take him. If you did have Rosen rated that high, then you have to go get him. And they did. Ultimately, that is what this draft will be measured by, is the success and or failure of Josh Rosen. Is he going to be able to stay healthy? Is he going to really have a lot of upside in terms of his progression and development as an NFL quarterback? Is he going to be committed to the game? Is he going to be able to get the players in the locker room to rally behind him? Is he going to be somebody that the coaches can work with? These are all legitimate, viable questions. And like I said, to be fair to Rosen, every single one of these guys, I don't care if you like Mayfield, Darnold, Allen, Lamar, they all have significant, serious questions and should not be discounted. You all have reasons for each one of these guys where they might not pan out. And ultimately, it's what this draft is going to be measured by. And this front office and this new coaching staff is going to be measured by, is Josh Rosen's success or failure. Now, I really like the pick of Christian Kirk for them in round 2. Granted, I had a higher grade on Anthony Miller, who went a few picks later, but I had Christian Kirk going them in round 2 of my mock, and I felt like he was a really good system fit for what they needed out of him in Arizona. I think Mason Cole is solid, not spectacular, but should be an eventual starter on the interior of that line. I was a little surprised that Chase Edmonds went in the 4th round, the running back from Fordham, but with David Johnson coming off of that wrist injury that forced him to miss 15 games last year, you want to have a little bit of a better depth chart behind him. Edmonds himself battled some injuries in 2017, so if he would have been healthy, he could have been a guy that went round 3 or 4 in this draft because he did have that level of talent. So he feels like a good number 2 option there. Like I said, looking at this draft class, you know, I feel like you got a couple of guys that can contribute, but it really will ultimately come down to Rosen. If Rosen is the Rosen one, then the Cardinals come out of this smelling like roses. If Lamar Jackson ends up being a better pro and or Rosen ends up being a dud or a bust, don't worry, Cardinals fans. You'll be firing Steve Keim soon enough and getting a new general manager and drafting a new quarterback in a couple of years.